I built the biggest ranch in the county, but have no one to leave it to. I wake up at 5 in the morning like I always do, but today feels different. Today is the day after I met with my lawyer, the day after he asked me that simple question that's been echoing in my head for 18 hours straight. Who do you want to leave it to? He'd asked, pen poised over the will documents, looking at me expectantly like the answer should be obvious. I sat there in his oak-paneled office, surrounded by leather-bound law books and framed degrees, a 67-year-old man who owns 8,000 acres of prime ranch land, and I had no answer. Are you enjoying this story? Then consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Take a look. 94.8% of the people who watch these videos are still not subscribed to the channel. If you're part of that group, take the opportunity to subscribe now. It's free, and you'll keep receiving amazing stories. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He waited patiently, probably thinking I was deciding between children, trying to figure out how to divide things fairly. Finally, I said, I don't have anyone, and watched his expression shift from professional patience to something that looked like pity mixed with confusion. How does a man build an empire and have nobody to leave it to? I get out of bed slowly, my joints protesting like they do every morning now. The house is silent, the kind of deep silence that comes from being the only living thing in a 4-bedroom home built for a family. I walk through rooms that have never been used for their intended purpose. The nursery my mother decorated 40 years ago, when she still hoped I'd give her grandchildren, sits dusty and untouched, the crib still in its box in the corner. The master bedroom, where a wife should sleep next to me, has an empty side with pillows that have never been used, sheets that get changed out of habit rather than necessity. I live in a monument to absence, to all the things that should have happened but didn't. My name is Thomas Garrett, and I'm the 3rd generation of Garretts to work this land. My grandfather, Thomas Sr., bought the original 100 acres in 1928 with money he'd saved working on other people's ranches for 15 years. He was 35 years old when he finally got his own place, already married to my grandmother Sarah with 2 kids, my father being the oldest. They lived in a 2-room cabin that my grandfather built with his own hands, no electricity, no running water, just hard work and determination. My grandmother used to tell me stories about those early years, about how they'd work from before sunrise to after sunset, about how every penny went back into the land, about how they slowly built something from nothing. But she also told me about the Sunday dinners, about the neighbors who'd come by for conversation and coffee, about the community dances they'd go to once a month, about how poor they were, but how rich they felt because they had each other and they had hope. I remember sitting on my grandmother's lap when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, small enough that I fit perfectly in the curve of her arms, and she'd tell me these stories about my grandfather. She'd describe how he'd come in from the fields covered in dirt and sweat, and she'd have dinner waiting, and they'd sit at their little table in that 2-room cabin and talk about their dreams. They dreamed of expanding the ranch, yes, but they also dreamed of sending their kids to good schools, of building a proper house with multiple bedrooms, of one day taking a trip to see the ocean, even though neither of them had ever been more than 50 miles from home. She told me about the time my grandfather surprised her with a store-bought dress for her birthday, how it had cost more than they could afford, but he'd saved for months in secret because he wanted to see her face light up. She told me about dancing in their tiny cabin, no music except what they hummed. My grandfather's rough rancher hands gentle on her waist, both of them exhausted from work, but taking a moment to remember why they were working so hard in the first place. My grandmother lived until I was 22, long enough to see me graduate from high school and start working the ranch full-time with my father. Long enough to see my mother die and watch my father retreat further into work. Long enough to pull me aside one day and say, "Tommy, don't make your father's mistake. The land is important, but it's not everything. You need more than work to make a life worth living." I nodded and said I understood, but I didn't. Not really. I was young and strong and convinced that hard work was the answer to everything. She died 3 months later, and at her funeral, the church was packed. Neighbors and friends and people whose lives she'd touched over 7 decades. She'd been poor most of her life, living in that same 2-room cabin my grandfather built until the day she died. but she'd been rich in all the ways that actually mattered. And I didn't understand that lesson either, not until it was far too late. My father, James Garrett, inherited those 100 acres when my grandfather died in 1956. I was just a baby then, born in 55, so I never knew my grandfather except through stories. My father was different from his father in some ways, but the same in others. He had the same work ethic, the same determination to build something bigger. By the time I was 10 years old, he'd expanded the ranch to 300 acres. By the time I was 20, it was 500. He did it through careful management, smart investments, and relentless work. But unlike my grandfather, my father wasn't much for socializing. He didn't go to the dances, didn't have neighbors over for coffee, didn't waste time, as he called it, on things that didn't directly contribute to the ranch's growth. My mother was a quiet woman who accepted this, who raised me and my sister mostly alone while my father worked. She died when I was 25, just wore out, the doctor said, though I think she died of loneliness long before her body gave out. I remember my mother more than I remember my father, even though I worked alongside him every day for 42 years until he died. She was the one who made sure I did my homework, who packed my lunches for school, who sat with me when I was sick. My father was always out on the land somewhere, always working, always pushing forward. When I was 8 years old, I broke my arm falling out of a tree, and my mother drove me to the hospital and sat with me through the whole ordeal, holding my good hand while they set the bone. My father came by later that evening, looked at the cast, asked if I'd be able to do my chores with one arm, and left. That was how he showed love, I think, by teaching me to be tough, to not let setbacks stop me, to keep working no matter what. But a kid doesn't understand that. A kid just understands that his father didn't seem to care that he was hurt. My mother tried to soften my father's hardness. When he'd criticize me for not working fast enough or not doing something perfectly, she'd pull me aside later and tell me I was doing fine, that my father was proud of me even if he didn't say it. When he'd skip my school events because there was work to be done, she'd be there in the front row, clapping louder than anyone. When he'd tell me that emotions were weakness and real men didn't cry, she'd wait until we were alone and tell me it was okay to feel things. That feeling deeply was what made us human. But her voice got quieter as the years went on, like she was running out of energy to fight against my father's worldview. By the time I was in high school, she barely spoke at dinner, just served the food and cleaned up and disappeared into her bedroom while my father and I discussed ranch business. She died on a Tuesday in March, just collapsed in the kitchen while making breakfast. The doctor said it was her heart, that it had just given out, but I think it was more than that. I think she died of being invisible, of spending 30 years married to a man who valued land more than her, of raising 2 kids who were growing up to be just like him. At her funeral, which was small and sad, I cried for the first time since I was a little kid. My father stood next to me, dry-eyed and stoic, and I could feel his disapproval even though he didn't say anything. After everyone left, and it was just us at the graveside, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "She was a good woman. Now we need to get back to work." And we did. We went back to the ranch and we worked because that's what Garrett men did. We worked through grief and pain and loss. We didn't process or feel or talk about it. We just worked. I have a sister, Emma, 2 years younger than me. She got out as soon as she could, married a man from California when she was 19 and never looked back. We talk maybe once a year, obligatory phone calls on Christmas where we exchange pleasantries and avoid talking about anything real. She has 3 kids, my nieces and nephews who I've met maybe 5 times total, who wouldn't recognize me if they passed me on the street. When my mother died, Emma came back for the funeral and pulled me aside. "Don't let this place eat you alive like it did Dad," she said. "There's more to life than acres and cattle." I nodded, but I didn't listen. I was already too far gone, already too committed to the path I'd chosen. Emma and I were close when we were kids, before the ranch consumed everything. I remember teaching her to ride when she was 6, running alongside her pony to make sure she didn't fall, her squeals of laughter echoing across the south pasture. I remember us building forts in the hay barn on rainy days, creating elaborate imaginary worlds where we were explorers or pirates or astronauts. I remember her following me everywhere, calling me Tommy, and holding my hand when we walked into town. But as we got older, As my father started training me to take over the ranch, as I started spending every free moment working instead of playing, we drifted apart. She'd ask me to play, and I'd say I had chores. She'd want to talk, and I'd be too tired. She'd need her big brother, and I'd be too busy being a rancher. By the time she was in high school, we barely spoke. She was into art and theater and music, all things my father considered frivolous. I'd absorbed his worldview by then, looked down on her interests as wastes of time. When she announced she was leaving for California with her boyfriend, my father was furious, said she was throwing away her heritage, abandoning her family. I stayed silent. Didn't defend her, didn't wish her well, just watched her pack up her room and leave. She hugged me goodbye, and I stood there stiff and uncomfortable, already so damaged by my father's emotional constipation that I couldn't even hug my own sister properly. She cried and said she'd miss me, and I said nothing. That was 28 years ago, and we've barely spoken since. I wonder sometimes what my life would have been like if I'd left with Emma. If I'd said no to my father's expectations, no to the ranch, no to the path that was laid out for me before I was old enough to choose. What if I'd gone to California or anywhere else, started fresh, built a normal life? I'd probably be married now, probably have kids, probably have a regular job that I left at the office instead of carrying home every single night. I'd probably be happy in that ordinary middle-class way that I used to look down on, but now understand was actually the good life all along. But I didn't leave. I stayed. I committed to the ranch, and to my father's dream of expansion, and to the belief that work and land were what defined a man's worth. When my father died 10 years ago at 73, I inherited the 500 acres and everything that came with it. By that point, I'd already been running the ranch for 20 years, working alongside him since I was old enough to sit on a horse. I'd gone to agricultural college for 2 years, but dropped out because my father needed me back home. I dated a little in college, nothing serious, just a few girls I took to movies or dinner, but nothing that stuck. When I came back to the ranch, dating seemed like a distraction, something other people did, people who had time for such things. I had a ranch to run, a legacy to build, a name to honor. My father had shown me by example that work came first, that everything else was secondary. He'd built the ranch from 100 to 500 acres. I was determined to do even better. And I did. God help me, I did. In the 10 years since my father's death, I've expanded the ranch from 500 acres to 8,000. 8,000 acres. It's the largest single ranch in the county now, bigger than any of my neighbors, bigger than anything my grandfather could have imagined when he bought that first 100 acres. I did it through aggressive buying whenever land came up for sale, through careful breeding programs that produced premium cattle, through modernization and efficiency, and working every single day without exception. I wake at 5, work until 9 or 10 at night, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I haven't taken a vacation in 30 years. I haven't had a sick day in I don't know how long. The ranch is my life, my purpose, my everything. Or at least that's what I thought until yesterday when my lawyer asked that question, and I realized I'd built all of this for absolutely nothing. The first major expansion came when I was 33, just a year after Rebecca left. The Anderson property, 200 prime acres that bordered mine to the north, came up for sale. Old man Anderson had died and his kids wanted nothing to do with ranching, just wanted to cash out and move on. I'd been saving for years, planning for an opportunity like this, and I had just enough for a down payment on a massive loan. I should have felt excited, should have felt like I was taking a huge step forward, but mostly I just felt empty. Rebecca had been gone a year, but I still thought about her all the time, still wondered what she was doing, still regretted letting her go. But I pushed those feelings down and focused on the numbers, the business case, the logical reasons why this expansion made sense. I remember the day I signed the papers, sitting in that same lawyer's office, where I'd sit 34 years later trying to figure out who to leave everything to. The lawyer was different then, the father of the current one, but the office was the same. He congratulated me on the purchase, said it was a smart move, that I was building something impressive. I signed my name over and over, committing to decades of debt, betting my entire future on this expansion. And when I walked out of that office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. I drove past the elementary school on my way home and saw a woman with blonde hair pushing kids on the swings, and for just a moment I thought it was Rebecca. Thought maybe she'd come back, but of course it wasn't her. She was gone, married to someone else, building a life with someone who'd chosen her over land. The Anderson property was the first big expansion, but it wasn't the last. Over the next 30 years, I bought piece after piece whenever anything came available. The Miller Place, 300 acres to the east. The Thompson Ranch, 400 acres to the south. The Davis property, 200 acres to the west. Each purchase required massive loans that took years to pay off. Each purchase required all my focus and energy and time. Each purchase made the ranch bigger and more successful and more valuable. And each purchase was another nail in the coffin of any chance I had at a normal life, another commitment that made it harder to imagine stepping back, another reason to say no to relationships and family and anything that might distract from the work. There were women, 3 of them specifically, who I remember clearly because they were the ones who actually wanted more than just a casual acquaintance. The first was Rebecca Morrison when I was 32. She was the new teacher at the local elementary school, fresh out of college, 24 years old, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and a smile that made my chest feel tight. We met at the feed store, where she was buying supplies for her classroom garden project. I helped her load bags of soil into her car, and she thanked me and asked if maybe I'd like to get coffee sometime. I said yes because something about her made me say yes, made me want to say yes even though I knew I didn't have time for this. We dated for 6 months, real dating, not just casual meetups but actual planned dates, where I'd shower and put on clean clothes and pick her up at her little apartment in town. We'd go to dinner at the diner, or to movies at the single-screen theater, or just drive around talking. She was smart and funny and kind, and she seemed genuinely interested in me and the ranch. She'd ask questions about the cattle and the land management, and she'd listen to my answers like they actually mattered. I'd find myself looking forward to seeing her, thinking about her when I was working, imagining what it would be like to have her at the ranch permanently. I remember our third date specifically, because it was the first time I really let myself think about a future with her. We'd driven out to the lake, about an hour from town, and we sat on a blanket watching the sunset. She was talking about her students, telling funny stories about things they'd said or done, and she was so animated and joyful that I couldn't take my eyes off her. At some point, she noticed me staring, and she laughed and asked what I was thinking about. I almost told her the truth, almost said I was thinking about how beautiful she was, how much I enjoyed being with her, how I could imagine doing this forever. But I chickened out, made some joke about being distracted by the sunset, and the moment passed. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd told her what I was feeling. Maybe if I had, maybe if I'd been more open from the start, things would have ended differently. After about 4 months, she started hinting about the future, talking about what she wanted in life, asking what I wanted. I knew what she was really asking. She wanted to know if this was going somewhere, if I was serious about her, if we had a future together. And I panicked. I started cancelling dates, saying I had work to do, that carving season was busy, that I had equipment that needed repairing. She was patient at first, understanding, said she knew ranch life was demanding, but after I cancelled 3 dates in a row, she showed up at my ranch unannounced. I was working on a tractor engine covered in grease, and she stood there in a pretty yellow dress and told me she needed to know where this was going. She said she was falling in love with me, and she needed to know if I felt the same way. And I froze. I stood there with a wrench in my hand, grease on my face, and I couldn't say the words. I liked her, maybe even loved her, but the ranch needed work, and I had plans to buy the Anderson property that had just come on the market, and I didn't have time for marriage and kids and all the complications that came with them. So I told her the truth, or at least what I thought was the truth. I told her I wasn't ready for something serious, that the ranch had to come first, that maybe someday, but not now. She cried. She actually stood there in my driveway and cried, tears running down her face, ruining her makeup, her voice breaking as she asked me why I'd let it go this far if I wasn't serious. I didn't have a good answer. The truth was I'd let it go this far because being with her felt good, because for a few hours a week I got to pretend I was a normal person with a normal life instead of a lonely rancher married to his work. But I couldn't tell her that. So I just stood there, silent and useless, while she cried. Finally, she wiped her eyes, looked at me with this mixture of sadness and anger, and said, "You're going to regret this, Tom. One day you're going to realize what you gave up, and it's going to break your heart." Then she got in her car and drove away. A year later, I heard she'd married a man from the next county over, an insurance salesman. They have 4 kids now. I see them sometimes at the grocery store, a whole loud, happy family, and I have to leave before they see me because I can't bear to look at what I gave up. Rebecca was right, of course. I do regret it. I've regretted it for 35 years. There hasn't been a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about her at least once, haven't wondered what my life would be like if I'd said yes instead of no, if I'd chosen her instead of the Anderson property. I'd probably have kids in their 30s now, maybe grandchildren. Maybe this house would be full of life instead of empty and silent. Maybe I'd wake up every morning next to someone who loved me instead of alone in a bed that's too big for one person. Maybe I'd be happy, but I chose the land instead. I chose 200 acres over a wife and family, and I've spent 35 years paying the price for that choice. The second woman was Linda Patterson when I was 41. She was a widow, 40 years old, owned the bookstore in town. Her husband had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and she'd been raising their 2 kids alone, a boy and a girl, teenagers by the time I met her. I'd gone into her store looking for a book on modern ranching techniques and ended up talking to her for an hour. She was easy to talk to, comfortable, like we'd known each other forever, even though we'd just met. She had brown hair starting to show grey and laugh lines around her eyes, and a warmth that made me want to stay in her store all day. I started going back once a week, always buying a book even though I was running out of shelf space at home. We'd talk about everything, about her kids and my ranch and life in general. And gradually those conversations turned into lunch dates, then dinner dates, then weekends where I'd help her around her house, fixing things that had broken since her husband died. Her kids liked me, which surprised me. The boy Michael was 16 and into cars, and I'd let him work on my old pickup truck, teaching him things my father had taught me. The girl, Sarah, was 14 and horse crazy, and I'd bring her out to the ranch to ride, watching her face light up in a way that made something in my chest ache. Linda and I dated for a year, a comfortable, easy year, where I started to think maybe this could work. She understood about the ranch, didn't complain when I had to cut dates short because of emergencies. She'd pack me lunches and leave them in my truck with little notes. She'd call just to check in, not demanding, just caring. Her kids started calling me Uncle Tom, started talking about the future like I'd be part of it. I remember one Sunday afternoon at her house, sitting at the kitchen table while she made dinner and the kids did homework at the counter. Michael asked me something about how to change a tire, and Sarah was telling her mother about a horse she'd ridden at the ranch, and it was so normal, so domestic, so much like what a real family felt like that I almost couldn't breathe. This is what I've been missing, I thought. This is what life is supposed to be like. And then she asked me to marry her. Not in a formal way, not with a ring and a bended knee, but one night after dinner at her place with her kids already in bed. She said, "Tom, I love you and my kids love you. We could be a family. You could move in here or we could move out to the ranch. We could make this work." And I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to say yes. But I thought about the ranch, about how I was planning to buy the Miller property, about how I'd need to take out a big loan, and it would require all my focus and attention. I thought about becoming an instant father to 2 teenagers, about all the complications and responsibilities that came with that. I thought about how my father never let anything distract him from building the ranch, and how that had to be the right way. So I told her I needed to think about it, that it was a big decision, that I needed time. She gave me time. She gave me 2 months while I agonized and rationalized and ultimately chose the ranch. When I finally told her I couldn't do it, that the timing wasn't right, that the ranch needed me, she didn't cry like Rebecca had. She just looked at me with sad, knowing eyes and said, "Tom, you're going to wake up one day and realize you chose the wrong thing." Then she asked me to leave, and I did. She sold the bookstore 6 months later and moved away with her kids. I don't know where she is now. I think about Linda a lot, more than I think about Rebecca even. Rebecca was young love, potential, what could have been. But Linda was real. She was a ready-made family, kids who already liked me, a woman who understood what ranch life was like, a chance to skip all the hard early years and jump straight into being part of something. And I walked away from it because I was planning to buy 300 acres of land, 300 acres that I bought and paid off, and that will be sold to pay taxes when I die. 300 acres that cost me a wife and 2 stepchildren who might have given me the grandchildren I'll never have. 300 acres that seemed so important at the time and mean absolutely nothing now. Michael would be 41 now, about the age I was when I met his mother. Sarah would be 39. They're probably married with families of their own, probably living good lives somewhere far from here, probably don't think about the rancher their mum dated for a year when they were teenagers. But I think about them. I think about Michael asking me about cars, and Sarah showing me her blue ribbon from the county fair horse show. I think about Sunday dinners at Linda's house and how good it felt to be part of something. I think about the Christmas where Sarah made me a drawing of my ranch, and Linda gave me a sweater she'd knitted, and Michael gave me a book about vintage tractors. I still have all of those things, the drawing framed on my bedroom wall, the sweater in my closet that I've never worn because it hurts too much, the book on my nightstand. They're the only gifts I've received in decades, the only evidence that for one brief year I was part of a family. The third woman was Jennifer Cole when I was 53. She was 45, a veterinarian who'd recently moved to the area to start her own practice. She came out to the ranch for a routine cattle check, and we hit it off immediately. She was smart, capable, funny, loved animals and ranch life. She was divorced with no kids, said she'd always been too focused on her career to have them. We started dating casually, just dinner every couple weeks, and it was easy and comfortable and uncomplicated. She didn't push for more, seemed content with what we had, and that made me relax around her in a way I hadn't with the other women. We dated like that for 3 years, this comfortable long-term casual thing where we saw each other regularly, but didn't make any formal commitments. I told myself this was perfect, that I'd finally found the right balance between companionship and independence. Jennifer seemed happy with the arrangement. She had her practice that kept her busy, I had my ranch, and we'd get together when it worked for both of us. No pressure, no expectations, no demands. It felt safe in a way the other relationships hadn't. But then she got offered a job at a big veterinary hospital in Denver, a great opportunity with better pay and resources, and colleagues to collaborate with. She came out to the ranch and told me about it, and said she'd turn it down if I asked her to. If I wanted to make this relationship something more serious, she said she loved me, and she'd choose me over the job if I'd choose her too. And once again, I froze. I was 56 years old by then. The ranch was up to 6,000 acres. I was closer than ever to having the biggest spread in the county. I couldn't imagine stepping back from that now. Couldn't imagine sharing my time and attention with someone else when I was so close to my goal. So I told her she should take the job, that it was too good an opportunity to pass up, that we'd stay in touch. She looked at me for a long time and then said, "No, we won't. You're married to that ranch, Tom. There's no room for anyone else." She left for Denver and I never heard from her again. I tried calling a few times in the first month, but she never answered, never called back. I wrote her a letter once, trying to explain my reasoning, trying to make her understand why I'd chosen the way I did, but I never sent it. What would be the point? She was right. I was married to the ranch. There wasn't room for anyone else. There never had been. 3 women, 3 chances at a different life, at family, at love, at all the things that normal people have. And I turned them all down. I chose the ranch every single time. I chose acres and cattle and equipment over human connection. I chose my father's path, his priorities, his definition of success. And now I'm 67 years old, sitting in my empty house at 5 in the morning, looking at 8,000 acres of land that I have nobody to leave to. The lawyer explained it to me yesterday, patient and professional as lawyers are. Without a spouse or children or designated heirs, my estate will go through probate when I die. The government will take about 40 to 50% in estate taxes. The rest will be sold to pay those taxes. Everything I built, everything my father built, everything my grandfather built, 3 generations of work and sacrifice and dedication will be broken up and sold off within months of my death. Strangers will own this land, Corporations will probably buy it, divide it up, maybe turn it into housing developments or hunting leases. The Garrett name will disappear like we never existed. I've been sitting here for an hour now, coffee cold in my hand, watching the sun come up over my land. 8,000 acres painted gold by the morning light, cattle grazing peacefully, fences strong and straight, barns and equipment sheds all maintained perfectly. It's beautiful. It's everything I've worked for. And it's completely meaningless. Success without someone to share it with is just failure wearing expensive clothes. I built an empire with nobody to pass it to, and that's not success, that's tragedy. My lawyer asked if there was anyone else, any cousins or more distant relatives. I thought about Emma and her kids. We're not close, but they are family. But giving it to them feels wrong too. Leaving everything to people who don't know this land, don't love it, will just sell it anyway. This land deserves someone who'll care for it like we did, someone who'll see it as more than just assets to liquidate. But there's nobody. 3 generations of building and there's nobody to pass it to. I think about my grandfather and grandmother in their little 2-room cabin, poor but happy, building something together. I think about the Sunday dinners and the community dances and the neighbors stopping by for coffee. They had what mattered. They had each other. My grandfather built 100 acres, but he also built a family, a life, memories that my grandmother would treasure for the 30 years she outlived him. When he died, she had children and grandchildren around her, people who loved her, people who carried on his legacy in ways that had nothing to do with property deeds. That was real success. That was building something that lasted. My father didn't quite have that. He was too focused on expansion, too isolated, too dedicated to work at the expense of everything else. My mother was lonely, and my sister left, and I'm sure he died with regrets, even if he never said them out loud. But at least he had a son to pass the ranch to. At least his work went to someone who valued it, who continued it, who honored what he'd built. He had that comfort at the end, knowing the ranch would go on. I don't even have that. I expanded the ranch beyond anything my father imagined, but I failed at the one thing that actually mattered. I failed to ensure it would continue. I'm dying, though I haven't told anyone yet. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. The doctor gave me maybe a year, probably less. It's aggressive and it's spreading, and I'm not doing treatment because what's the point? More time alone in this empty house? More years of working with nobody to work for? I almost felt relieved when he told me. At least it'll be over soon, this lonely half-life I've been living. At least the regret will end. But then yesterday, sitting in the lawyer's office, realizing that everything dies with me, that my family's legacy ends with me, that I failed in the most fundamental way possible, the relief disappeared, and all that's left is this crushing regret. Are you enjoying this story? Then consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Take a look. 94.8% of the people who watch these videos are still not subscribed to the channel. If you're part of that group, take the opportunity to subscribe now. It's free and you'll keep receiving amazing stories. I keep thinking about Rebecca in her yellow dress, asking where our relationship was going. If I'd said yes, if I'd married her, we'd probably have kids in their 30s now. Maybe grandchildren. Maybe this house would be full of family visiting, of noise and life, and the kind of chaos that makes a house a home. The nursery my mother decorated would have been used. The master bedroom would have 2 people in it. The kitchen table would see family dinners instead of just me eating alone. I keep thinking about Linda's kids calling me Uncle Tom, about how easily I could have become their stepfather, could have had instant family, could have built something real with them. They'd be adults now, maybe with families of their own, maybe working the ranch alongside me, maybe giving me the grandchildren I'll never have. I keep thinking about Jennifer's sad, knowing eyes telling me I was married to the ranch, how right she was, how clearly she saw what I couldn't see myself. She was the last chance, the final opportunity to choose differently, and I blew it, just like I'd blown the others. At 56, I still could have built a life, still could have had a decade or 2 of companionship and love, still could have had something other than this empty end I'm facing now. But I chose the ranch. I chose to push from 6,000 to 8,000 acres. I chose wrong one more time, and by the time I realized it, Jennifer was gone, and I was too old and set in my ways to try again. The tragedy isn't just that I'm alone now. The tragedy is that I chose this. I had 3 chances at a different life, and I chose this every single time. I can't blame bad luck or circumstances or fate. This is entirely my fault, my decision, my failure. I looked at love and family and human connection and said, no, the ranch is more important. And I was wrong, so catastrophically wrong that I don't even know how to process it. I pour the cold coffee down the sink and make fresh, going through the motions out of habit rather than desire. Everything feels like habit now, empty rituals that fill time until time runs out. I used to love mornings on the ranch, loved the peace of watching the sun rise, loved the feeling of starting another day of productive work. Now mornings just remind me that I'm one day closer to dying alone, one day closer to having it all taken away, one day closer to the end of a life that was never really lived. My ranch hands will start arriving in an hour. I employ 6 men full-time, good workers who've been with me for years. They're respectful and professional, and we have a good working relationship, but that's all it is, a working relationship. None of them are friends. I don't know their wives' names or their kids' names or what they do when they're not here. They clock in, do their work, clock out, go home to their actual lives, and I stay here in my empty house with my 8,000 acres and my dying body and my overwhelming regret. Pete has been my foreman for 20 years. He's 55 now, has a wife named Maria, who I've met exactly twice at Christmas parties years ago, 3 grown kids who I've never met, and a couple of grandkids he mentions sometimes. He's a good man, reliable and skilled, and I trust him completely with the ranch operations. But we're not friends. We don't talk about personal things. We don't share our lives beyond what's necessary for work. And that's my fault, not his. I've kept everyone at arm's length for so long that I don't know how to be anything else. When I was younger, and people asked why I wasn't married, I'd say I was too busy, that I'd get around to it eventually, that there was plenty of time. Then I hit 50, and people stopped asking, just gave me pitying looks like they'd figured out I was one of those confirmed bachelors who'd never settle down. Now at 67, with cancer eating away at me, the question is answered. I was too busy. I didn't get around to it. There wasn't plenty of time, and now there's no time left at all. I wonder what Rebecca's life is like now. Is she happy with her insurance salesman husband and their 4 kids? Do they have a normal suburban life somewhere? Family dinners and soccer games and anniversaries? Does she ever think about the ranch hand she dated when she was 24? Wonder what happened to him? Feel relieved she dodged that bullet? I hope she's happy. I hope all 3 of them are happy. They deserve to be happy with men who chose them, who put them first, who understood that love matters more than land. The sun is fully up now, and it's time to start the day. Same routine as every other day for the last 40-some years. Check the cattle, check the fences, check the equipment, check the water levels. Check everything twice, because that's what you do when you're running a ranch this size. Except now, every task feels pointless. Why am I checking fences that will belong to someone else soon? Why am I maintaining equipment that strangers will use? Why am I doing any of this when it's all going to be taken away anyway? But I do it because it's what I know, because stopping would mean acknowledging that it was all for nothing, because moving forward is easier than sitting still with my thoughts. So I pull on my boots and my hat, and I walk out into the morning, and I pretend that this day matters like all the days before it, even though I know it doesn't, even though I know I'm just killing time until time kills me. The north pasture looks good, grass thick and green from the recent rains. The cattle are healthy, well-fed, content. I've got some of the best bloodlines in the state, the result of 30 years of careful breeding. Every calf brings top dollar at auction. It's the kind of operation other ranchers envy, the kind agricultural magazines want to write articles about. Success by every measure that people in this business care about, and completely hollow when you're experiencing it alone, when there's nobody to share it with, nobody to pass it on to, nobody to care. I find myself thinking about the Anderson property, that 200-acre spread I bought instead of marrying Rebecca. It's good land, solid pasture, helped me expand significantly. But what did it cost? A wife, children, grandchildren, a life. I traded human connection for 200 acres of grass, and I thought I was making a smart business decision. I thought I was prioritizing correctly. I thought I was building something important. I was building a prison. My father used to say, the land is everything. Take care of the land and it'll take care of you. He was wrong. The land doesn't care about you. The land doesn't visit you when you're dying. The land doesn't cry at your funeral. The land doesn't remember your name after you're gone. The land is just dirt and grass, valuable maybe, but incapable of love or loyalty or any of the things that actually matter. People matter. Relationships matter. Family matters. And I sacrificed all of that for dirt and grass. Around noon, Pete comes to find me. He's been working here long enough that he can read my moods, knows when something's wrong, even if I don't say it. He asks how I'm feeling, and I lie and say I'm fine. He doesn't believe me, I can tell, but he doesn't push. He updates me on the south pasture fence repair and the medication schedule for a couple cows with mastitis and the delivery timeline for the feed order. All important ranch business. All meaningless in the grand scheme of my dying alone with nobody to leave this to. I almost tell him about the cancer. Almost say, Pete, I'm dying, and when I do, all of this is going to be sold off, and I don't know what that means for your job or anyone else's job. But I thought you should know. But I don't. I don't know how to have that conversation. Don't know how to admit that I've failed so completely that I'm taking everyone down with me. When I die, the ranch will be sold, and Pete and the other hands will lose their jobs, and that's on me too. More failure, more people hurt by my choices. After Pete leaves, I sit on the porch of the main house and look out at my empire. 8,000 acres, bigger than anything my grandfather or father imagined, bigger than any of my neighbors, the biggest ranch in the county. And in a year, maybe less, it won't be mine anymore. It'll be broken up and sold off and forgotten. 3 generations of Garrett legacy erased like we never existed. Because I couldn't figure out that life was more important than land. I think about making one of those video wills, leaving a message for whoever ends up buying this place. Take care of this land. My grandfather built it with his bare hands. My father gave his life to it. I gave everything for it. It matters. But even as I think it, I know how pathetic it sounds. It doesn't matter. Not really. Not in the way that matters. A family matters. Love matters. Children and grandchildren matter. Land is just land. Evening comes and the hands leave and I'm alone again. I make dinner, something simple from a can, eat it standing at the sink while looking out at the darkening landscape. This is my life. This has always been my life. Me alone, eating alone, sleeping alone, living alone. 67 years of solitude interrupted only by work. What was the point? What was any of it for? I think about calling Emma. It's been probably 6 months since we last talked. I could tell her about the cancer, about the will, about how everything ends with me. I could apologize for not being a better brother, for choosing the ranch over family, for making the same mistakes Dad made. But what would be the point? We're strangers now, connected only by DNA and shared childhood memories that neither of us probably want to revisit. Her kids don't know me. I don't know them. We're not family in any real sense. We're just people who happen to be related. Emma's oldest, my nephew Jacob, must be around 30 now. I met him once when he was maybe 7, at a family reunion that Emma organized, trying to maintain some connection between us. He was a bright kid, asked a million questions about the ranch and the cattle and the horses. I answered them all, probably more engaged with him than I'd been with Emma in years. At the end of the day, he asked if he could come visit the ranch sometime, see all the things I'd been describing. I said sure, of course, anytime, knowing I'd never follow through, knowing Emma wouldn't push it, knowing that visit would never happen. And it didn't. That was 23 years ago. Jacob's a grown man now, probably doesn't even remember that conversation, certainly doesn't think about the uncle he met once for a few hours. Emma has 2 other kids, a daughter named Sophie, who'd be about 27, and another son, Michael, who'd be about 24. I've never met either of them. They were born after Emma and I had our falling out, after she'd given up trying to maintain a relationship with me. She sent birth announcements, and I sent cards with checks, impersonal acknowledgements of their existence. They probably don't know I exist, beyond being some distant uncle their mom mentions occasionally. And why would they? I've never been part of their lives. I chose not to be part of their lives, chose the ranch over being an uncle, chose isolation over connection yet again. If I'd been a better brother, if I'd maintained a relationship with Emma, maybe her kids would know me. Maybe they'd visit the ranch. Maybe one of them would fall in love with it the way I did. Maybe I'd have someone to leave it to who actually wanted it. But I burned that bridge decades ago through neglect and indifference, and it's too late to rebuild it now. Even if I left the ranch to Emma's kids in my will, they'd just sell it. It would mean nothing to them except a financial windfall. And maybe that's all it deserves to be at this point. Maybe a ranch built through the sacrifice of all human connection deserves to be sold off to strangers. I go to bed at 9, exhausted from another day of pointless work. The cancer pain is getting worse, despite the medications. Everything hurts all the time now, a constant ache that reminds me I'm dying, that time is running out, that I wasted my chance at life, and now I'm paying the price. I lie in my big empty bed in my big empty house on my 8,000 acres of empty land, and I understand with crystal clarity that I have failed at being human. I succeeded at being a rancher, but failed at everything else. And in the end, that's all that will matter. Sleep doesn't come easy anymore. I lie awake in the dark, my mind racing through decades of choices and chances and missed opportunities. The cancer pain pulses through me, but it's nothing compared to the emotional pain, the regret, the crushing weight of understanding that I got everything wrong. Success isn't measured in acres or cattle or profit margins. Success is measured in the people who love you, the family you build, the connections you make, the life you actually live, instead of the work you do. My grandfather understood that. He had his 100 acres, but he also had his wife and kids and community. He worked hard, but he also lived. He built something real that lasted beyond his death. My father started to lose that understanding, got too focused on expansion, but at least he had me to pass the ranch to. And I completed the destruction, took it all the way, built the biggest ranch and the emptiest life, succeeded by every external measure while failing at everything internal. I think about all the moments I could have chosen differently, not just the big moments with Rebecca and Linda and Jennifer, but the small moments too. The neighbor who invited me to a barbecue, and I said I had work to do. The church social I skipped because I needed to check on the cattle. The county fair I missed because it was calving season. The funeral of a friend's father I didn't attend because I was negotiating a land deal. Hundreds of moments where I chose work over connection, where I prioritized the ranch over relationships, where I said no to being part of the community in favor of being alone with my empire. Are you enjoying this story? Then consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Take a look. 94.8% of the people who watch these videos are still not subscribed to the channel. If you're part of that group, take the opportunity to subscribe now. It's free, and you'll keep receiving amazing stories. There was a woman at church, I remember now. This was years ago, maybe when I was in my early 50s. Margaret was her name. She was a few years older than me, a widow whose husband had died of a heart attack. We'd talk sometimes after service, just friendly conversation, but I could tell she was interested in more. She'd mention activities at church, suggest I come to the potluck dinners or the volunteer days, and I'd always have an excuse. Too busy, too much work, maybe next time. After a few months of this, she stopped asking. A year or so later, she married a man from the next town over, someone who had time for her, someone who showed up. I remember feeling a twinge of something when I heard, maybe regret, maybe relief, I'm not sure. Just another woman I pushed away, another chance I didn't take, another brick in the wall I built around myself. And there were others, not women I dated, but women who showed interest that I shut down before it could develop into anything. The waitress at the diner who always seemed happy to see me, who'd linger at my table making conversation. The bank teller who smiled a little too warmly when I made deposits. The woman at the feed store who asked about my ranch and seemed genuinely interested. None of these were grand romantic gestures, just small signs of interest from women who might have been willing to get to know me better. And I deflected every single one, kept the conversation brief and professional, made it clear I wasn't available emotionally, even if I was technically single. I was protecting myself, I suppose. After Rebecca and Linda, after being hurt by my own choices, it was easier to just shut down completely than to risk that kind of pain again. But what I was really doing was ensuring I'd end up exactly where I am now, alone and dying with nobody who cares. The pain I avoided by not opening myself up to love is nothing compared to the pain I'm feeling now. This all-consuming regret that eats at me worse than any cancer. Tomorrow I'll wake up at 5 again. I'll make coffee and go through my routine and do all the things I've always done. And I'll be one day closer to dying alone, one day closer to having it all taken away, one day closer to proving that I wasted the only life I'll ever get. That's my legacy. Not 8,000 acres, not the biggest ranch in the county, not 3 generations of hard work. My legacy is that I chose wrong over and over again until it was too late to choose differently. And the worst part, the part that kills me more than the cancer, is that I knew. Deep down, I always knew. When Rebecca asked where our relationship was going, part of me wanted to say yes. When Linda asked me to marry her, part of me wanted to jump at the chance. When Jennifer said she'd stay if I asked, part of me wanted to ask. But I silenced that part every time. Told it that the ranch was more important, that there would be time later, that I was making the smart choice. I knew I was lying to myself, but I did it anyway. And now here I am, dying alone exactly as I deserved, exactly as I chose, exactly as everyone warned me I would. Rebecca was right to cry and walk away. Linda was right that I'd wake up one day and realize I chose wrong. Jennifer was right that I was married to the ranch with no room for anyone else. They all saw the truth and I refused to. They all offered me a different life and I rejected it. They all deserved better than what I could give them, and they all found better, and I'm glad they did. But God, I wish I'd been different. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose them, to choose life, to choose love over land. The darkness feels heavier tonight, the silence louder, the emptiness more complete. This is what I built. This is my achievement. 8,000 acres of loneliness, a fortress of isolation, a monument to choosing wrong. And soon it'll all be gone, sold to strangers, my name forgotten, my life meaningless. 3 generations of Garrett legacy ending in spectacular failure because the 3rd generation couldn't figure out what actually mattered until it was too late to matter. I close my eyes and try to sleep, but all I see are the faces of the women I rejected, the children I never had, the life I could have lived if I'd been wiser or braver or less damaged by my father's example. I see Rebecca in her yellow dress, Linda with her kind knowing eyes, Jennifer saying she'd choose me if I'd choose her. I see the grandchildren who will never exist, the family dinners that will never happen, the love that could have been, but wasn't. And I understand that this is hell, not fire and brimstone, but regret and loneliness, and the clear-eyed knowledge that you destroyed your own chance at happiness through fear and stubbornness and terrible choices. The next morning comes and I wake up at 5 like always, and the routine starts again. Coffee, breakfast alone, walking the property, checking on things that won't be mine much longer. Pete arrives with the other hands, and we discuss the day's work, and I pretend everything is normal. But nothing is normal. Nothing has been normal for 67 years. Normal people have families. Normal people have love. Normal people build lives, not just ranches. And I'm not normal. I'm broken in some fundamental way that I didn't recognize until it was far too late to fix. That's my story. That's my legacy. I built the biggest ranch in the county, and I have nobody to leave it to. And that sentence contains my entire failure as a human being. I chose wrong. I chose land over love, work over family, isolation over connection. And now I'm 67 years old, dying of cancer, alone in an empty house, facing the end with nothing but regret for company. So I succeeded at everything that doesn't matter and failed at everything that does. And it's too late to fix any of it, too late to go back, too late to choose differently, just too late. The biggest ranch in the county, the loneliest man in the world, that's me. That's what I built. And in a few months, both will be gone like they never existed, like I never existed. Because without family to remember you, without love to carry forward your name, without children to tell your story, you disappear completely. And maybe that's exactly what I deserve.
like the steady beat of hooves on dust. You learn it, live it, pass it on. No, this I live it literally. Sad nazvu hoodie vinets, whether it was